Well, good evening, trumpet players. It'll be daytime tomorrow, but when I release this. But I was thinking how tomorrow's uh, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, right? And I wanted to tell you guys this story before I forget. Um, there was, over 2 decades ago, maybe even 3 decades ago, I when I was doing all the Spanish-speaking gigs. I was doing salsa, I was doing Mexican music, I was doing Tejano music, I was playing all kinds of music in Spanish-speaking bands. And it was Cinco de Mayo week, and I had a run. I think it was something like 9 gigs in 7 days. Because obviously when people are celebrating Cinco de Mayo, they want to have a band. And some people, since they can't get the band on the actual Cinco de Mayo, they would book it for a day after, a day before, stuff like that. So I was working a lot that week. And on the first gig, I was on a gig with David Caceres, and which is not a Latin gig, by the way. That's more of a party band, jazz/party band. And I was standing next to my friend Ed Lowe, the trombone player, and we were talking, and I realized at the last minute that we were just about to start playing. So I remember it very well. We were at one of those wedding venue places, and they had us up in the balcony, and Ed and I were on a separate balcony, like way over in the corner. So we're talking to each other. Nobody's going to see it because everybody's downstairs. And so we're having a conversation. Now I realized we need to be playing like in a split second. So I brought my horn up, and I popped myself in the lip on the first gig of a 9-gig run. And I'm telling you, the next song I couldn't play yet. So because I swelled up so bad. It was, normal swelling is, maybe the size of a pea, maybe a little bit smaller than that. This was like the size of my entire embouchure, like the whole mouthpiece placement. The entire lip was swollen up. And I worked my way through that gig the best I could. If I remember right, I think I moved the embouchure over here and did what I could. That's, you could almost summarize my entire career that way. That was my income. I didn't have the option of saying, oh, my lips hurt, and go home and not play. This is how I paid my bills. This is how I put food on the table. This is how I put gas in the tank. There wasn't an option of saying, oh, I hurt my lip. Let's not, we'll get somebody else. I couldn't do that. So I made it work. And what makes this remarkable, it was the first of 9 gigs. The first of a 9-gig run. And it wasn't any better the second day. It wasn't better the third day because I had to keep playing on it. So I did all kinds of stuff that week to try to bring it down. I took ibuprofen. I don't recommend that, by the way, now. And I never really took a lot of ibuprofen in my lifetime, so I'm not saying that ibuprofen is one of the reasons I'm on dialysis now. I never took enough of it for it to be like that. But just knowing how easy it is to take too much of that stuff, I wouldn't recommend. Really, I wouldn't recommend ibuprofen for swelling in the lips, because we have a tendency to swell too much. You need to find a different. So I did do ice on, ice off, ice on, and then heat, and then ice, and then heat. I also do this thing where I massage the lips this way, but I was doing all of that. But this was bad damage. Usually I can do the ice and the cold. I mean the ice, the hot and the cold back and forth, and massage my lips, and oh, I also do this one here, like pushing it down and spreading it out. There's a bunch of stuff like this I do, and usually it can make the swelling go down. But normal, when I say normal swelling after the gig. But when you pop yourself like that, that's not normal, okay? That's hardcore. And the swelling didn't go away. I had to manage the entire week. Now, what's remarkable about that, nobody ever said, hey, Eddie, you suck. Nobody ever said, hey, you're out of tune. Nobody ever said, hey, you got this terrible sound. When I say I managed, I'm not saying I just got by. I'm saying, you know, there's something that happens. This is one of the reasons. This is one of the stories in my background that makes me tell people that great trumpet playing is largely mental. And when I say that, I mean like 99% mental. Because I know people that they get something minor on their lips, nothing compared to what I'm describing here, and they use that as an excuse for sounding bad. And I've never had that, because of the fact that my livelihood depends on this. And when you know that, when you know your livelihood depends on it, you have to make it work. And there's, you know, what is that old saying? Necessity is the mother of invention. So the fact that I was always, I say was, I'm not there now, but in the early years, early 20 years of my career, I was always a bottom feeder, just barely making it. You guys have heard me talk about that before. Because of that, there are some experiences I've had that where I got benefits out of it that other people probably never experience. But yes, through the whole week, this is very similar, by the way, to when I had a cracked tooth. I had a cracked tooth and too many gigs to go to the dentist. You know, you don't go to the dentist and then go to a gig, and you can't afford to not do the gig. So you do the gig with a cracked tooth. And you know, I just realized now, some people might think that this is an example of me getting my priorities backwards because I'm putting trumpet first. No. If I was putting trumpet first, I would have not taken those gigs. Think about it. I was putting my family first before my chops. I was putting my family first. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? If you don't, I teach this thing. I'm changing the name of it, but online, if you're looking for it, it's called the Wholesome Musical Priorities. I teach that to my students, and but I'm writing a book about it that I call True Art. I'm gonna have to rewrite the whole book because the angle I was taking didn't pan out. But anyway, getting back to the tooth. I had a cracked molar, and anytime I played and air got into the molar, it would cause excruciating pain. So I figured out a way to lock my tongue into the upper molars and channel the air around that broken tooth. Think about that. It's like, who does that? But if you get my point? When you have to, you have to. When there's no other choice. The necessity is the mother of invention. I knew I had no other choice. I had to go, I don't remember how long it was, probably over the weekend. And I had to finish the weekend off before I went to go get that tooth. I ended up having to get root canals and stuff like that. But, yeah, I went several gigs. That was back in the days when I had as many as 3 or 4 gigs on a Saturday. I would do like a Dixieland gig in the early morning. I would do a wedding reception at noon. I would do another wedding reception in the evening, and then I would do a salsa gig starting at about midnight. I remember one time the early gig was like up in Woodlands, which is like an hour and a half north of where I live now, and then the late gig was down in Galveston. So I probably got hundreds of miles on the road that day. Anyway, my point is, it's just like the story I told you about Cinco de Mayo. I busted my lip. For Cinco de Mayo, I busted my lip and had to do those other gigs. I had to make it work. And it was Latin stuff, mostly. So I had to play lead on all of it. And I had to make it work. I learned so much about embouchures and how they work because I did those gigs. Think about that. I learned so much. Instead of not doing the gigs, which would have been, if I was a trumpet worshiper, that would have been the right thing to do, to protect my chops. But instead, I had a family to feed, and I made that the priority. And as a result, I got trumpet information. I received trumpet information that most people never ever have a clue about. Because I went ahead and played on that busted up lip. And it's the same thing with the tooth. I learned stuff about how the trumpet works by channeling that air around the tooth. It's an amazing thing, really. And you know what? I don't even think some people say, well, that was very clever. No, it wasn't clever. It was pain. Pain can make you do some very interesting things. So yeah, if I remember right, of course it's decades ago, right? If I remember right, it wasn't something intellectual I came up with. You know how we flinch when we hurt ourselves? It was sort of a musical flinch. But it was a musical flinch that taught me so much. When, so don't, please don't disregard me when I tell you that trumpet playing is largely mental. Don't disregard me when I say that. It's not just a theory. It's not just some crazy idea that popped into my mind. The fact that I have lived the way I've lived and had to make things work gave me, I remember someone online in the 90s called people like me gig rats. And I was actually quite proud of that title, gig rat. The guy meant it in a very negative way, like as an insult. And the way he described it, he said for him, he had his college teaching job, and he could select the gigs he wanted to take. And that, praise God, congratulations to him, right? Congratulations to him. I would have loved to have that option. I would have loved that, right? But there's something that happens to your playing. Now, I've understood that other way for a long, long time. The first time I heard that philosophy was from a sax player, famous guy, soprano sax, Dave Liebman. I heard him say that you should, if you want to be serious about jazz, you should never take any other gig and only play jazz. I've heard him say that. Probably at a master class or something. I don't remember. So it's this idea that the university professor can be more selective. But see, this particular university professor was talking about people like me. He wasn't talking about me specifically, but talking about people like me who have to play gigs for a living. And he called us gig rats. And I remember my teacher, he has a less derogatory version of it. He calls us, you guys in the trenches, right? Yeah, so, the people who can select their gigs. Let me leave you with one more piece of information, right? I remember talking to Dennis Dotson about the old traditional players and the new modern players, and he would say, those, by the way, Dennis Dotson is considered, and rightfully so, the best jazz player in Houston on trumpet. So everybody here respects him. And so he's talking about the difference between modern players and the traditional old players, right? And he says, the modern players are wonderful, wonderful players, he says. But he says something's missing. There's something missing in their playing. And my opinion, I'm taking that one step farther. My opinion about why that is, because I agree with him. Not as much as I used to, and maybe he doesn't say that as much anymore, because there are some modern players today who have that thing that I think he's talking about. But my opinion is that what was different with the players back then is that they had to play whatever gig came up to put food on the table. I remember a quote from Clifford Brown where he said, there's a lot of great players out there, but what happens to them is largely financial. There's a saying here in Houston, well, at least with this buddy of mine, Daryl Bear, you gotta have a gig to get a gig. And that falls right in line with what Clifford Brown said. Clifford Brown said, there's a lot of great players, but what happens to them is largely financial. In other words, if they can't make it on the scene, they don't make it at all. And what happens is, to be a great player really requires a whole bunch of time commitment. That also probably sounds like I'm contradicting myself. I'm not contradicting myself. I don't have time to explain it now. That's not a contradiction. You know how I say you don't have to practice all the time. That's actually true. But you would have also heard me say, unless there's a deadline. And if you're a serious player about making a living, that is a deadline. That is a deadline. You still don't need to be phobic about taking days off, but there's a lot of work to be done. If you want to go pro, there's a lot of work to be done, and it's not going to get done in a couple days. So, anyway, all of this to talk about Cinco de Mayo. I had that 1 week that was just miserable. Started the first day with a busted chop, but it was also extremely rewarding. I am so grateful for what I learned, and I'll tell you what, it made me a stronger player afterwards. Okay. Anyway, you know, I don't ever do this, but since it's on my mind, why don't you, in the comment section, tell me any stories you might have had about times when you busted your chops like that. I think it'd be interesting to read some of these stories. For me, it was just bringing my horn up way too fast. All right. That's it for today. Happy Cinco de Mayo, and we'll see you at the next video. All right. God bless you.